Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack Van Horn from the University of Virginia. I am very proud to welcome you to this edition of our 2023-2024 Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series. This lecture series is supported by UVA's Integrated Translational Health Institute of Virginia, the UVA College of Arts and Sciences, the UVA School of Data Science, and through grants from the National Institutes of General Medical Sciences. Since 2016, the Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series has focused on the use of data science methodologies, artificial intelligence, deep learning, and statistical modeling as they pertain to differing themes in the biomedical and health sciences. Our theme this year is focused on building of partnerships for generative AI training in biomedical and clinical research, where every Friday we enjoy leading thinkers presenting their talks on issues about the promise, the opportunities, and hurdles associated with the emergence of AI-based methods. Vitally important are the efforts of faculty educators in training the next generation of biomedical researchers to properly utilize these new computational tools. Participants selected for our Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab program will leverage these seminar presentations as vital material in a culminating in-person manuscript and grant project development workshop to be held at the Bahia Beachfront Resort located in sunny San Diego, California in June of 2024. We're very excited for this year's program. It's very engaging, bringing together AI platform developers, biomedical researchers, and university level educators to better understand the power, the promise, and potential pitfalls associated with the generative AI explosion. And today, I am delighted to welcome our speaker, Professor Zeng from George Washington University, where she is a tenured professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership and as a research scientist at the DC Veterans Affairs Hospital. She is also the director of the Biomedical Informatics Center at George Washington University and co-director of the Center of Data Science Outcomes Research for the Veterans Administration. She also co-leads the informatics core of the George Washington CTSI. She has published over 180 peer-reviewed articles and served as a PI, co-PI for millions of different grants from the NIH to the VA to the CDC and other funding organizations. And in continuing our 2023-2024 Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series theme, Professor Zeng's lecture today is entitled Using Explainable AI to Enhance Biomedical Data Analysis. Deep neural networks are powerful technologies, and she will remind us that these are being utilized in a growing number of applications, and the range of research projects is increasingly large, including disease prediction in biomedicine. But on the other hand, these deep neural networks are also known to be difficult to explain as compared to traditional statistical models, which may limit some of their utilization and adoption in many areas, particularly in clinical practice, where explanatory inference is vitally important. Dr. Zeng's team has developed novel explainable AI methods to quantify the impact of individual variables and interactions between variables on those outcomes. And they have also developed a method to quantify the impact of temporal trends and longitudinal analysis. And she'll be telling us about that today. As always, we are streaming this lecture live and for recording via YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you very, very much for joining us. Also, our specially selected 2023-2024 Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab participants and alumni are encouraged to submit any questions they have via the chat feature in their YouTube sessions. I'll be synthesizing these questions and asking them on your behalf during the last 10 minutes or so of the lecture. And with that, welcome, Professor Zeng. We are very excited to be hearing from you today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be speaking today. We're here because AI has been so successful with deep neural network as a signature technology. Neural network in of itself is not new, but the deep neural network, especially the recent rise of generative AI, really moved DNA technology and the broader AI techniques to the forefront of many non-computer scientists' mind. As we all know, they have been very successful in image recognition, in speech recognition, authentic gameplay, nowadays in chatbots. Along with its success, I believe many of us have heard about the talks about AI and ethics. People are worried this very powerful technique can lead to unintended consequences. And there are many aspects of AI ethics. I'm listing here a few of those which are highlighted by the Veteran Affairs. So one is AI needs to be purposeful. We want them to be effective and safe. This goes without saying, because we can think of examples such as the self-driving car. If it gets into accident, often it makes news. When a human gets into a car accident, it usually doesn't make into the news. We want the technology to be safe and private. We want it to be fair and equitable. This, again, is a very, very important point and really concerning a lot of people, because we don't want AI model to be learning from biased data and perpetuate the bias. And there are already examples where the AI model clearly are biased. And when people try to correct such biases, sometimes the awkward attempt lead into other unintended consequences. Then there's the accountability and the monitoring. So AI models, especially some of the dynamic models, keeps on learning, and their effectiveness, their safety needs to be continually monitored. And finally, I'm getting to the point about transparency and explainability. So that's the topic we're going to focus on today, is explainable AI. In reality, there have been many models. Many models people use are far from transparent and explainable, but people are not so worried about them. One example is today's weather forecasting systems. We know they're not perfect. In fact, they often make mistakes. And except the leading scientists in the field, most people really do not know how the weather forecasting systems are working, the ones that give the TV quotes and stuff. But AI has been so successful. As a consequence of its success, people are really worried about its transparency and explainability. What is explainable AI? Well, explanation can be many different things. But when people think about AI needs explanation, one thing they often think about is DNN models, and people would call it black box models. And it's not that they are really intentionally not transparent. The problem lies within its complexity. When we have a model with millions, and these days, billions, tens of billions, and even trillions of, potentially trillions of parameters, it's not useful when we know the parameters. This is different from a linear model with, let's say, half a dozen variables. Somebody tells you the coefficient, and you feel like you understand the model. So it is important for us to explain the DNN model's behavior and how it arrived at its conclusion. And this has been the field of much interest in the past 5 years or so. I mean, even though the explanation effort goes way back when neural networks are not deep yet. So here is a slide. I got this figure from a DARPA article. I thought this is a very good slide explaining what we're trying to do with explainable AI. So most of you already know machine learning very well. So we have training data, we learn a function, we output a probability. sometimes it's some other form of data, like with generative AI, you output the text you generate, but it's also based on internal systems, saying some form of score, probability, and so on. And people really sometimes are puzzled. Well, how did you arrive at this conclusion? And also, we don't always know, actually, with most of our systems, we don't know completely when do we succeed, when do we fail. And this leads to a trust issue. Trustworthy AI is another hot topic these days. People want to know if they can trust the conclusion of the system, and if there's a mistake, how they can correct the mistake. So hopefully with explainable AI, we can reach a point of understanding why not, when we succeed, when we fail, when to trust us, to what extent, I guess, trust us, and know why we made a mistake. So they're using this cat example, which is easier because this explanation can go like it has furs, whiskers, and so on. So we have done a stakeholder interview in NIH-funded supplement where we interviewed 17 individuals, 3 clinicians, 3 patients, 3 bioethics experts, 2 IT experts, 3 healthcare administrators, and 3 policymakers. We asked them a lot of questions about how they perceive AI. And one of the themes that we focused on is XAI, explainable AI. It turns out all of the stakeholders told us explainable AI is important for them. Of course, it's for different reasons. But all of them believe that transparency and comprehensibility are critical to build trust and confidence. Clinicians want to know, for example, when they can use the system and what is the confidence interval of the prediction. And the patients really want to know where does this whole thing come from before they feel confident with the conclusion. As I talk about explanation or explainability, I want to caution us one thing about the difference between explanation and causality. Sometimes people confuse the two. They think when we explain, we know what caused some results. You can see I included this figure here. Sometimes it's just correlation, right? Hot weather can cause ice cream to melt. It also can cause people to wear a hat, and otherwise they will get a sunburn. But ice cream and sunburn are not inherently related. So to use explanation to think about causality, we need much more than that. We need the strength of association, consistency, specificity, temporality, biological gradient, plausibility, coherence, how the experiment is designed, and so on and so forth. And so explanation and the insight into the black box models can help us understand the relationship, for example, between exposure and disease. But we should not think of explanation as causality. Explanation is just the first step. Another point I want to mention is explanation by nature is not complete information. If we have complete information, you would go back to the millions, billions of parameter issue. So it is just a way to look at how the model works. It's not a complete understanding of the model. Another point I want to make about explanation is the difference between ground truth and the explanation of the models. So when we work with real-world data, whether it's GWAS data or clinical records and so on, So we have lots of observations. Even when we have experimental designs, we have like we have to have some observations, right? And using the data, we fit all kinds of models. All explanations are explaining the model. So the quality of the explanation are directly related to the real world settings, but we should not equate the explanation of models as explanation of the real world phenomena. This is particularly important to keep in mind, as in the biomedical domain, pretty much no model is 100% accurate. Oftentimes we're far from it. So the explanation is only a partial explanation of what the model can capture. And the model is only a partial reflection of the real world ground truth. So one thing people have looked at a lot is the feature contribution. That's almost the first thing when people talk about explainable AI, they think about. Because after all, these are the key ingredients, right? Data coming in the form of features, and the result come out in the form of outcomes or probabilities. So there has been a number of methods that have been developed. For example, we have when people use attention-based neural networks, and people can go back to look at the attention, which are these weights, to sometimes visualize, sometimes quantify these attention mechanisms. I'm showing an example here where you have an image, they're trying to recognize the dog in this picture, and they're highlighting what are the features being used by the neural network to recognize this dog. So there are other very well-known methods. One is local interpretable model agnostic explanation, that's LIME, and Shapley additive explanations, that's SHAP. And there are some methods that are different, like for example, some methods goes basically trying to reverse engineer the neural network. They do this layer-wise relevance propagation. And for certain things like you probably have seen importance score for random forest, decision trees, and so on. They try to see the importance of a node and such. So we developed a method called impact score or impact scores to explain DNN models. So impact scores are a kind of LAM method where we perturb the value of a specific feature and try to quantify the effect of individual variable on the outcome based on the perturbation of the value. We can view it as a generalized form of the coefficients of the predictor values, predictor variables in linear logistic regression models. Of course, there are differences and so on. But this point is actually, I just want to stay here for a moment. This is important because that makes us different from, let's say, importance score, where the goal is trying to rank the features within a model versus these impact scores can be compared across different models, just like the odds ratio. So here I give an example of simplified deep learning model. Of course, you can have as many hidden layers. You can have all kinds of configurations, residual, all kinds of things, right? But the important thing is we have some values going in. We have this value coming out. And if we do a logic transformation, what we get is the log odds. So to calculate the impact score, we need to pick a reference value. This again is very similar to if you do largest regression, you need to have a reference value. When you say this increase the risk or decrease the probability, we have to say comparing to what, right? That's our reference value. So for each variable, we can choose a reference value. And all these other values can be compared to the reference. For example, a very common thing when we deal with clinical data is we can look at, let's say, a disease like hypertension, where 1 means the presence, 0 means the absence. And oftentimes, by default, we'll choose the more prevalent variables, such as the absence of a disease, as the reference value. Of course, this changes when we have numerical continuous variables. There we would often choose, let's say, a normal value as the reference, because below and above often confers increased risk. So it's just by convention. There's nothing fundamental about the reference value. So here is the formula we use to calculate the impact score for a variable xi. And we're just comparing the difference in logic divided by the difference in the value. Just like in the line method, we do this calculation on the individual level. However, if a person is interested, we could calculate this on the population level. It's the mean of individual level impact scores. In fact, because the way we're calculating this and based on our experience of observation, oftentimes the individual values can have a wide range. So the mean is just a summary of the individual levels. It doesn't capture the full information. We can report for example, the standard deviation of the impact scores on the individual level. We can report the median and all that. A special case of this method will be a largest regression model, as you can see here. Where our impact score will be the log odds ratio in this formula, so it will be just the coefficient. However, as all of us know, to a large extent, the power of DNN comes from its ability to model highly nonlinear relationships. The individual level scores in nonlinear models will be different. When we first started working on this, we submitted, one time we submitted a grant saying, look, we can explain this deep learning model. And the reviewer comes back to us saying, why should we trust your explanation? Because you're using a method to explain a black box model. So we wouldn't know if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And the reviewer is correct. So we need to validate the explanations. And validation needs ground truth. So for some tasks, this is easier, like image recognition, speech recognition, translation. And if we look at, for example, if they translate the word, you can see if the translation is correct. You can see if the explanation makes sense, like the picture we showed previously. You can see if the highlighted portion of the image corresponding to a dog. And in such cases, the ground truth comes from human perception. For tasks like clinical outcome prediction, it's far more challenging. we don't really know, like, at least not 100% what is resulting in, let's say, a worse outcome. So the ground truth comes from, let's say, the biological nature in the medicine. And the knowledge about how human body works is fairly limited. And oftentimes there's a lot of confounders, mediators, and so on. So this is why simulation can help. So to validate our impact score, we created a simulated data set. As you can see, we have 100 variables. And the outcome, to keep it simple, we just have a binary outcome, right? And we modeled two relationships. One is linear, one is nonlinear. The nonlinear one has this interaction term you can see here. So the outcome variable, we determine the value using the formula here. It's a Bernoulli distribution. And we generated 50,000 data sets, data incidences as the simulated data. The simplicity is intentional because this way we can say, here is the reason why the answer is correct or wrong in terms of the explanation. So here you can see the results. So we trained DNA models. We didn't try to reach perfection in these models. You can see in both cases, we use 30 epochs. And the linear model, we reached 87% AUC. A nonlinear model, we reached 89% AUC. And we looked at the performance of the impact score comparing to the coefficients, which is the expected ground truth, right? So you can see the mean absolute predicted value over the absolute actual value. So the error, the amount of error is actually pretty small, 11% and 12%. We also try to correlate when we ranked the features by their coefficients. You can see we have almost perfect Pearson's correlation and Spearman's correlation. So this gives us confidence that the impact score does reflect the underlying true model. Another aspect of the deep learning that many people are interested in is interaction. This is because DNN's power lies in its ability to model the nonlinear relationship. So we really want to know the interaction. And so the more strict interaction definition we took from is interaction is said to occur if the separate effects of factors do not combine additively. So there's either the combination of the two variables have a greater effect, something we usually call synergy, or the other way that is increasing the risk. So that's when we have interaction. There has been also some prior methods, and these are all actively being, some of them are still being actively worked on. Some of them, as you can see here, for example, you could observe the interaction graphically. There has been visualization tools. There are some methods that are model agnostic, and then there are models that are not. Clearly, it's harder when you have a method that is only applicable for a particular model. the meaning of it is harder to interpret. And we also can look at the computational costs. Some are high, some are low. For example, the SHAP interaction is very high, has a very high computational cost. Here's the formula we use to calculate the individual level interaction. I'm not going to go through the whole details of the formula, but roughly we are following the definition we have given. If there is interaction, we expect their impact to be more than additive. And the population interaction score, just like we do with the impact score, it is calculated simply as the mean. Of course, more can be reported. So here we use two simulation data sets. One is similar to what we did with the impact score, largely linear, but with a nonlinear term. Here is the second simulation here, where we vary this a bit more to make it more interesting. So we have a simpler interaction term, but we also have less simple interaction terms. So here I want to show you the results from simulation data set 1. We give you the interaction score, but I also want to show you these are all comparing to the ground truth. Let me go back to just refresh your memory what these are. So we did one is the PDV, standard deviation of the partial dependence function values. Another is the GSM. We are fitting a second interpreted model with linear and interaction terms using the first model's inputs and outputs. So PDV definitely didn't do too well, and this is partially because it outputs absolute value, doesn't have a positive and negative. So that really mess up its correlation. In terms of the correlation, so our interaction score and the GSM coefficients are very similar. Both did fairly well. So the second one, because we don't have so many interaction terms, we'll just show you the pairs, right? So we really only have 3 that are true interaction terms, and the other 3 should be 0. And as you can see, it's 0 for the interaction score, 0 for the PDV for these 3. And here you see very small values from the GSM method. It's not too bad. And in terms of the interaction scores, we really have a very good results in terms of the interaction score. So here the value is 5, here the value is -10. This one is trickier because this actually, the level of interaction depends on the value of x2 and x3. So this really is a very imperfect summary. But you can see interaction score and GSM still did quite similarly. And this is where we get very interesting. So here I want to draw your attention to the interaction score, right? So the interaction score we generate gives different level on the it gives different values on the individual level. And you can see with this x3, x4 interaction, based on this formula, it's -10. So it's always consistent, right? And actually the same with this 5. But on the individual level, based on the formula you can see here, we expect their value to differ. And in reality, they do differ. You can see here because how much they interact is depending on the specific value of x1, x2, and x3. So this is important for real-world application because individuals, how their attributes interact are expected to be different. It's not everybody have the same, just as not on the individual level, not all features have the same contribution. They also don't have the same interactions. So this is a very important thing. So now I'm going to give you one use case. We have worked on several studies related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. This is important because the world's population, similar to the US population, I included a figure here, is aging and aging quite fast. And well, it's good for people to live longer. Generally, most people lose their cognitive function at some point as they age. They may or may not reach the level of ADRD before the death, but generally speaking, everybody's cognitive function is decreasing. And what's annoying about ADRD is there's no cure. There has been some recently, a few of the approved drugs. Then they have two problems. One is that they tend to be very, very expensive. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars for a year. And their effect can be very modest. And also they have small side effects as well. So in one of our studies, we created an incident ADRD cohort. So the cases are those who developed ADRD, the controls are those without. As you can see here, we included a number of variables, and the cases tend to be older than the control, and they have some difference in their various characteristics. And we fitted a machine learning model, a deep neural network model, and we also calculated the impact score. So this gives us another sense of validation. So age is the biggest and most verified risk factors for ADRD. So age is the biggest factor, TBI, depression, stroke, these are all very understandable, and the literature has lots of evidence supporting this. BMI actually is inversely related to the ADRD incidence. This is less discussed in literature, but if you look at all the published data sets, if they show this is not surprising either. Of course, remember what I said, this is correlation, not causality, right? So it could be reverse causality. It could be one explanation people have talked about is in the years of leading up to dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, the disease process sometimes started 10 years before the diagnosis are made. And in the process, people may be losing weight, especially for elderly. They could be losing weight as they age, especially when their cognitive functions are gradually decreasing. They may forget to eat. So in terms of ADRD and BMI, there's definitely a strong correlation between BMI and ADRD incidence with this inverse relationship. And then we look down at the other variable. Again, another thing that people talk a lot about is race. So we know Black has higher incidence than white, and you see here, and all of these other things as well. And also increased, like a higher income is associated with lower incidence of ADRD, which is correlated, probably mediated through education. In that study, we're also interested in risk-specific interactions. So as you can see here, we looked at what other covariates interacted with race. So we see age, we also see BMI, and a number of other things. So how do we interpret this positive interaction score? Now, remember, age and the Black race are both associated with higher risks. And unfortunately, if we have this interaction score as positive, what this is telling us is that older Black individuals are at even higher risk than the additive of being Black and being an older person. So this is not a particularly good thing. On the other hand, BMI is associated with a lower risk, and this is a negative interaction value. So the way we interpret this is their combined risk is less than the additive risk. So BMI maybe, if it's causal, of course, most people don't believe it's causal. If it is causal, then the protective effect with a negative interaction score will be even stronger. So when we did this study, we found a number of these factors we found are already reported in literature. However, there's also some novel findings, like the relationship with chronic kidney disease and so on. So that is interesting. That shows us we can discover new information using this interaction analysis. So here is a separate study. We're looking at fitness and ADRD. So fitness is actually, as we all know, fitness is good for many things. And in terms of ADRD, there has been literature showing that fitness is correlated with lower risk of ADRD. However, clinical studies like RCTs have not yielded promising results, and probably because these intervention studies are too late and with too small sample size. So by the time people are already showing the symptom, it's too late for fitness to alter the course of the disease. And here you see we have 50,000 case, 50,000 controls, and we fitted a hybrid value aware transformer. Transformer is all the rage these days, given how powerful and successful the GPT model has been. However, we cannot just apply a GPT model to something like clinical data. And there are many reasons for that. Even though we have sequence time series data in clinical record, we also have issues such as missing values. We have values to begin with, and we also have different concepts, which roughly you can correlate with corresponding to words. So this hybrid value aware model has an arm for the branch for the non-longitudinal data. We also have this longitudinal data. We do concept embedding, temporal embedding. We also do like value embedding. And the reason why we need to do temporal embedding is because clinical data do not have regular time intervals. So the results you see here for the HVAT is very good, but keep in mind this is a case control study. And comparing to SVM and just feed forward neural network, we believe temporal data adds a lot because these two orange bars represent the data where we collapse them at the baseline. As you can see, if we don't use any of the temporal data, we don't do well. But even if when we collapse them, still use neural network, we do roughly the same within a percentage point as SVM. So clearly the model captured some information temporal wise, and but how do we evaluate this? MET is a measurement. MET is a standard measurement of fitness, right? Fitness, so in order for us to understand the temporal relationship in fitness data, we're looking at this MET, the temporal values. So roughly, we developed the temporal mean and temporal slope in the data. We also looked at the how the different impact score value matters and so on. So roughly by interpreting the temporal mean and temporal slope, our conclusion, not too surprisingly, is the mean matters. Actually, the mean matters more than the trend. So a higher mean generally is associated with, on average, is associated with lower risk of ADRD. But given the same mean, a trend of improving fitness is associated with lower risk. And interestingly, the association of the overall MET score with ADRD risk is approximately linear, but the association of the temporal slope with the ADRD risk was clearly not linear. So we also have applied this method to a number of other use cases. In one of the studies, we looked at the predictors, especially we're very interested in modifiable predictors for the outcome of major cardiovascular surgeries in older and potentially frail patients. This is because these surgeries are increasingly being provided to older patients. However, we don't really always know if the patients who are on the upper end of the older age range have the reserve to recover from the surgery, if the surgery is worth it. We looked at risk factors for opioid misuse. We looked at the benefit of CAH for lower back pain, suicide risk in LGBT versus non-LGBT. We looked at ACE inhibitors and ARB dosing in patients with heart failure. So what we have learned some lessons. One is that due to the complexity and limited availability, in some cases we have lots of data, in some cases we don't. There's not infinite supply of MRI data, for example. In the old models have limitations. And we need to explain AI models, these imperfect models, to generate evidence, but also we need to explain them in such a way clinician will be willing to utilize them in clinical care, and patients would have confidence in following the advice. Another important thing is explainable AI can empower precision medicine. This graph I'm including here is actually my colleague and close collaborator, Dr. Ali Ahmed's favorite slides. So here we're showing that with or without treatment, using a medication. So the scientific evidence would tell you there's five patients out of 100, you can reduce deaths in 5 patients. So this sounds really, really good, right? But the problem is we don't know which 5 of those are going to benefit. And in reality is some of those people who didn't die will suffer. Some of those patients would not die anyway, and they still suffer the side effects because in order to gain that 5, we're treating 100 patients. So if we can apply these explainable AI methods to know who should we treat, it will really make a difference. So here I'm just including a slide. We're showing you one thought we have is where to go with this is different treatment for different patients, because in reality, our guess is it's worse than the picture we showed you. It's probably when we say you're going to have benefit, a subgroup has benefit, a subgroup doesn't. A subgroup actually may have harm, even though overall there is benefit. So we want to have a tailored treatment approach where all group benefits. So there's explainable AI is a topic we can talk more about. There are many more subjects we can discuss, like what do we mean comprehensible? Impact interaction score may be comprehensible to somebody who's well-versed in odds ratio, but not to others. How complete is the interpretation? What assumption, what validation, and so on and so forth. So we can talk a lot about explainable AI, but it is an important topic to keep exploring. With that, I'm going to conclude my presentation and going to questions and answers.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation. Thank you. That's lovely. I was, very curious about you're showing the interaction scores, and you're looking at all this is per your ADRD study. And the thing that kind of struck me is that you have an opportunity there to kind of do some hypothesis generation, right? It's not more than just like explanatory AI, but it's an idea, a kind of an idea generator, right? You can say,
Right.
there's some sort of positive association between, one of those variables and say, traumatic brain injury, for example, which in ADRD is kind of a mystery, right? We don't quite know if a traumatic brain injury earlier in life sits there, as and the relic of that comes back later to cause Alzheimer's disease, for example. By finding that association and with the strength scores that you find, does that give you some sort of a rationale to then go and explore that further? What would you think about that?
Fantastic. I couldn't agree with more. So one study I'm not showing here is we have a NIA funded study called Medication Wide Association Plus. Precisely is we have one aim is purely hypothesis generation. Because ADRD is very hard to treat once the process has begun, so prevention is very important. Lots of money has poured into drug repurposing. Pretty much came back empty-handed. So, so I would say 99% of the work has gone into the drug repurposing for ADRD are mechanistic driven. So they usually come with these gene, protein, pharmacology, and all these complex data models, right? So they have these networks and they traverse the networks and try to come up with hypothesis. Let's say drug A treats something that causes plaque, and the plaque can leads to the dementia and so on. So the amyloid tau mechanism has been explored extremely extensively, I would say. And of course, you can always explore those. But so far, it has not been super successful. And we applied a version of this to, I mean, we're just at the sort of beginning point of that project, but in our preliminary study, we applied a modeling to the data, clinical data, and trying to come up with hypothesis. And we came back with some interesting hypotheses. Again, some are known suspects, like statin type of things, right? But some are very peculiar. There was like one slide we show, many people would laugh because it's showing Viagra is very helpful. But it's not that laughable because uh, if you Google, you can find there's a JAMA article virtually saying similar things. And it could be, the mechanistic could be many a thing, right? It could be increased circulation and so on and so forth. But I think the possibility of hypothesis generation is very valuable because deep neural network can take into account of so many covariates, simultaneously adjusting for them and such. Of course, the hypothesis generation is has to be followed by the confirmation, and that's probably the tougher one. But definitely, yeah, this is a very important aspect of the explainable AI.
What are the topics are the purpose of this year's BDSIL is building partnerships for generative AI training and biomedical and clinical research. A lot of the stuff that you talked about is right in that space. And I'm curious what you think the next generation of biomedical researchers and folks who are doing data science working in that space, what do they need to know about where we're at now and where this field is going and where it's going to be by the time they get to, my advanced age, for example?
Yeah, I mean, AI certainly stunned us in how good it the revival is amazing, right? I mean, even the story of the co-founders and the early employees of OpenAI is reads like a novel.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. I think they didn't even know it would work out so well. And partially, I think this is empowered by the availability of big data and this tremendous amount of computing power. And so I think it's astonishing what it can do. But as with every powerful tool, I think we're only learning on how to control it and how to interpret it and how to leverage it for our gain, right? Especially in biomedical research. So on one hand, you see such beautiful example like AlphaFold. My goodness, it is so wonderful, right? And then there were cases where people are reporting, especially in the AI ethics, AI bias part, because the behavior, it used to be our models don't work too well, but it does exactly what we tell it to do. But now it's working pretty well in most cases, but we no longer know when it doesn't do well. So this second problem is a very big problem in clinical medicine, as you are very well aware of, right?
Yeah, I think it was funny. You earlier in your talk, you mentioned the weather, right? And that we have
Mm-hmm.
weather models that make predictions. And at every, we're driving to work and we hear on the radio that there's going to be a, 30% chance of rain, or there's going to be,
Right.
at some point during the day or during that week or what have you, right? And we plan our lives on this stuff, and it's been that way for as long as I can remember. But those models are based upon, very precise partial differential equations, which, have understood parameters of humidity and temperature and altitude and a variety of other, factors. But now the deep learning models are actually doing a pretty good job of predicting the weather without necessarily needing to know what those partial differential equations look like. And, we're getting to a point where there are so many parameters that we can't even fathom how to understand them. Most of us have a general intuition of what humidity means, but some of these other factors which are coming out of these models are, who knows what they are, and what they really mean. And I think, some of your work has touched on that how these things interact with each other. How do you adjudicate that? And how these methods are being applied is super exciting. And I think that, you've really touched on some stuff which I think will be of real importance to our listeners today. So thank you.
Great.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We're at the top of our hour. So thank you, Dr. Zeng from George Washington University. We are very excited to have you as a mentor this year, and we thank you once again for sharing your wonderful work. And everyone have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next